Hi, it's Friday. That's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. Every week, you know the drill. I'm John, this is Jeremy, and we're numbers guys, right? We deal with a lot of numbers, and we talk about what they mean. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree, but that's the fun of it. So here we go. I'm trying to make sense out of so many numbers this week, and I'm going to put them through a funnel and try to get some meaning out of it. So just as I was heading down here to record, the Labor Department came out with its monthly figures, and they're good. 428,000 new jobs were created. That's a total of 22 million jobs that have been salvaged or created since COVID. Unemployment rate is at unheard of levels, 5.6%. At the same time, however, the inflation rate and consumer purchasing, inflation rate is at over 6% on an annual basis. Spending is down 2%. All that's understandable. People are trying to conserve on their spending. However, amidst all of this, the president is flatlined in terms of his polling numbers. He's at about 40% job approval level. Sometimes you see a little bit of a bump in some polls, and other polls have him down into the mid to high 30s. Doesn't appear that he can catch a break. So that's that. And that's enough to conclude, I think, here we are, this is April 1st, that the only way that the Democrats can be saved this year is if inflation is gotten under control. You've seen just in the last 24 hours that the president announced that he's going to open up the oil reserves and place about 1.5 million barrels from our reserves into the market. Although economists aren't terribly enthusiastic about that, it'll be short-term relief, but not long-standing relief. Okay. With that said, all of the congressional generic numbers, who will you vote for Congress this November, point in the direction of a Republican victory. In my polling and observations over the years, when I see that number, I've said this before, you have to start with a Democratic lead of 5 percentage points in order for the Democrats to hold on to what they have. Anything above that, they gain seats. What we're seeing, however, is the Republicans actually leading in that national figure. Most recent poll out yesterday, the Republicans up by 3, which means they're in a position, at least for now, to gain seats. But here's my question for the day. Can the Republicans blow it between now and November? And here's what I'm looking at. I'm sorry for going on, but I hope you find this interesting. I'm isolating 3 key Senate races, and those are Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And what I'm seeing is, number one, an over-reliance on Donald Trump and Trump-ism, candidates who are really bending over backwards to focus on Donald Trump's agenda, that the 2020 election was a fraud, that they are pro-God and pro-gun, to the point where, a moderate candidate, mainstream candidate, doesn't really even have a chance. But the other problem is that in these 3 states, they are beating the hell out of each other. And there are no clear front runners anymore, to the point where I'm wondering if they're going to beat each other to political death. and set the table for Democratic victories unexpectedly in those 3 states. Let me go over them real quick, okay? Missouri. Their major trouble there is that they have a former governor who was politically dead, had to resign because of a sex scandal, in which case then he tried to blackmail the woman he was having an affair with and had to resign from the governorship. Now his wife has come out, former wife, and said that she was physically abused by him. He is now the front runner in the U.S. Senate race, and he's running against 2 very strong candidates, and it's a 3-way tie. The difficulty is that if folks could coalesce around one of the opposing candidates, they'd be able to beat him. But now you have 2 candidates opposing him, 3-way tie, and a lot of bloodletting in that race. Ohio, 1 month, May 3rd, 7 candidates seek the Republican nomination. There are 2 front runners who are going after each other in an incredible way. There's a banker named Mike Gibbons who's running, who charged the former state treasurer, said, "You've never worked a day in your life." And during the debate, former state treasurer comes up to him into his space and says, "Tell that to my 3 tours in Iraq, that I never worked a day in my life." That's what we're going against here, what the party is going against. And then finally, there's Pennsylvania. We've talked about it before, but David McCormick, former hedge fund CEO, is now in a 9-point lead over Dr. Oz. He's not pulled away from it yet, but it's become very much a 3-person race. Carla Sands, a former ambassador, who's billing herself among the 3 as the only true Pennsylvanian, because neither of these fellows is from Pennsylvania. But the race is getting very, very nasty, especially between McCormick and Oz, and Republicans are kind of throwing their hands up in the air. That's a long intro, but what do you suppose, from the vantage point, here it is, April 1st. Is this election a done deal for Republicans, given the trouble that Biden is in, or are they overplaying their hand?
It looks to be right now. And you go back to the data that you opened up with, and I have to be honest, when you talk about, or when anyone talks about the Labor Department data, the unemployment, the inflation data, I feel like really the only people that take that serious would either be economists and the class of pundits, who are a really, really tiny percentage of the vote. I say that because everybody else is going to the gas pump and they see gas prices at near historic highs, in some areas definitely historic highs. People are watching their rent go up. People see the cost of foodstuffs going up, and these are things that the inflation rate doesn't take into account, just like the unemployment rate doesn't take into account people who've dropped out altogether. When they talk about jobs that have been added, oftentimes they're temp jobs, they're part-time jobs. So it's not really an indicator of anything, of any real growth. So the voters know what's going on. The pundits and the economists take this stuff seriously because it's official data, but the voters know better. Biden being at 40% approval, it looks to be that the section of the vote that carried him to a victory, to a comfortable victory, are turning on him. Generally the suburban vote, generally the independent vote. We're seeing this all over the country where I mean, I can't say in every state, but in some of the other states we're polling, there's something interesting going on with independents. I mean, even in very blue states like New York, there is a chance for independents to move over if if the candidate is good, if the message is good. And so what I would pay attention to nationally is, and we're trying to think about voter turnout here. Who's going to be really excited? I think the suburban vote is going to be very excited. I have a hunch you might see the rural vote really, really, really turn out. And so one has to dive into that. What does it mean to be suburban? What's living in the suburbs? What does that mean to the American dream? What does that mean to the fundamental way of life that you're trying to maintain? And then what does it mean to be rural? And when you really look at those two large voting blocks, it doesn't look like the Biden presidency necessarily has their lifestyles in mind in terms of policy, and it doesn't look like the Biden administration can really excite them. If anything, I think a majority of suburban and rural voters tell you that they feel their ways of life is under assault from the Biden administration. So that's why I would say it doesn't look good. It would have to take something really big, which I don't know what it is. I mean, I was toying with the idea when Ukraine started, and we started to see pretty good unity from between the Republicans and the Democrats, that could bring the country together. But there's too much going on that could not even Ukraine can really unite. It really comes down to how people perceive their way of life, and whether the presidency is supporting their values and their way of life, or whether it's attacking them.
So a lot of it comes down to what each party is going to emphasize. On one hand, presidencies and parties go up and down, obviously because of the economy, and 6% inflation is bad news. And there really doesn't appear to be much hope in attacking that unless we move into a recession of some sort, and that is looming. But talk about the wrong issue to go into an election with. A recession is not very cool either. And those presidents who have gone into congressional elections in the midst of a recession or just climbing out of a recession, Ronald Reagan in '82, George H.W. Bush in '92 can attest to that. The point about change and the way of life, demographic change, sexual orientation change, cultural change, immigration, the attack on the perceived attack on the way of life, our values, the way things have always been, I think is probably the ace in the hole for Republicans, but it's not a majority ace in the hole, and it's not enough, I think, to win that suburban vote that can be liberal socially and maybe a tad more conservative fiscally. I think in many ways what the election may revolve around is crime. Is crime, public safety? Do you feel safer than you did 4 years ago? Do you feel safe in your community? Do you trust the police? And what impact has the Black Lives Matter and the problem in the streets, what impact has that had on you and your perception of the United States of America? And in that sense, this is a very important election coming up. I mean, the past few have been pivotal, but this is an important one, and I'm confounded as of this moment. It looks like it should be slam dunk for the Republicans, but I'm seeing them bloodletting right now, and I don't know if I don't know if we live in an era where candidates and parties can heal in the interests of winning.
What
I think too much going against that.
where do you see the bloodletting, like the top two examples?
Well, I think there was a debate in Ohio this past week, U.S. Senate candidates, and the front-runner banker went after the state treasurer, and it was personal in both instances. Pennsylvania has become extremely personal. These are just the Senate races. Missouri, no one in the party wants Eric Greitens, the former governor, to be the nominee. And even though he's declining in the polls, he still has enough support to be tied with the other two candidates, all of whom are trying to be Donald Trump. In a state, Missouri is another one of those states where you've got two big cities and metro areas to the far east and the far west, St. Louis and Kansas City. But in the middle is very conservative country. Donald Trump scores pretty well in the central rest of the state, as they call it, but I don't see that message resonating at all in the two dominant regions of the state.
So, you gave me an idea for a book,
Okay.
maybe even a novel.
All right.
And after the 2022 election, I think I'm going to write something ode to Dostoevsky, and it's going to be called Crime and Inflation instead
Okay.
of
All
Crime
right.
and Punishment. And now I tie those two together because, yeah, crime is big, and we see that in New York State. It's in California. Anywhere where there are big cities, crime is generally up. The national average of crime is up. Violent crime, crimes with firearms, robberies. We're talking about inflation. We're talking about a looming recession. You know, I've been interested in this kind of stuff going back to 2011. I really started paying attention. And I remember for years that the optimism was so thick that you could cut it with a knife and in the air everywhere. And what I find fascinating is the last year, the extent to which the mainstream media, not the independent media, because the independent media was already there a decade ago talking about, you know, the monetary issues, the financial issues, especially inflation. But now the mainstream media has caught on. And what's amazing is the mainstream media is very doom and gloom, especially on the topic of inflation and the economy. There's very little optimism. So that's baked in. I mean, that issue's not going to go away unless it's really addressed. But even if it's addressed, there's going to have to be some pain. I'm talking about even raising interest rates up. You know, even to 1%, I think could be troublesome. And so, I mean, either way you put it, I think the monetary issues and inflation are going to become a bigger problem, which ties into crime. I think that's why part of why crime. I know, you know, the cutting back on the police departments and all that, wherever that happened, certainly played a role. But as people feel the pressure and have to start making choices between which staples, everyday staples, that's when you're going to see an explosion. So 2022 is really going to be a book about crime and inflation. I can see it.
All right, one final question. Does Donald Trump have the juice that he had before? Does he have coattails? Is that your sense? Because there's plenty of evidence, I'll tell you, that he does not. And that there are Republicans, not in these three states, but there are Republicans that are starting to run away from him.
Yeah, I can make the case for both. I can see where people are ready to say, I've had enough, move on, okay, Donald, you know, it's the same thing over and over. But at the same time, with the Republican Party, with Americans in a pressure cooker, and the perception from the Republican side that we have to win this, and Donald Trump was a third-party candidate who took over the Republicans. And so, in this context, are they going to abandon ship, or and never underestimate the tricks and what Donald Trump has up his sleeve. I mean, right? This is a master wheeler and dealer. I mean, one could argue you've seen nothing yet in terms of what he could dig and bring out in terms of demagoguery.
Well, here he is asking Putin on a personal level to help in the investigation of Hunter Biden.
Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, I could see it either way. Long story short.
Okay, well, I think we've raised some important questions. Stay tuned. You're going to be hearing more about some of these Senate races, and of course, very soon we're going to have results. Pennsylvania has their primary in mid-April.
Yeah.
So, okay, have a good week. I'll see you next week.
Have a good week.